right, everybody. Thank you for checking this out. This is the first official episode of the Plotcast. Dead Ted, my new podcast where I will just be going through a plot summary of every movie I see this year, which should be every movie but the scary movies. So a lot of movies. I already saw and reviewed Like a Boss, and I included the plot summary in that video, but I kind of figured that if I try and do that with every video, they're all going to be pretty long. So I thought it might be better to split it up and have a review video, a podcast where I do the plot summary, and then maybe like one video a month where I do all of the previews for the month. I think that could be cool. But more on that later. So for now, let's just get into the plot summary for 1917, which I loved. I thought it was an amazing movie. And so let's get into it. So, as you might guess by the title of the movie, that takes place in 1917, World War II. What do I say? World War One. Sorry, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. World War One, and we are learning about our the British side. The main characters are two lovely boys. Let me quickly look up their names really quick so we know. All right. So we have the two boys. We got the tall one. George McKay is the actor's name, and he plays Corporal Schofield. And our other guy, the more shorter, the brown-haired one, is Dean Charles Chapman, and his name is Lance Corporal Blake. So we got two Lance Corporals, two good boys. I love them. Loved them. They were amazing performances. So we start off in this beautiful flowery field. We're lowering in on the flowery field. Maybe it's like a distant village, maybe far off from the war. But as we get closer and farther down, we begin to see two soldiers dozing in this field in the pleasant afternoon sun. So I guess not too far from the war. So they're relaxing, maxing out, relaxing, and when somebody walks up and says that one of the officers wants to talk to them, he says this to our boy Blake, and the guy makes sure he makes sure to include that Blake needs to bring somebody. So seeing as Schofield is the only one around him, he obviously picks Schofield. But the whole time it's funny because you can't tell if Schofield's like closing his eyes because he's just trying to keep sleeping, or if he wants to avoid being chosen. So we don't really know. But I mean, we don't know what they're getting chosen for yet. So who knows? So they begin to trudge off, and it turns out that they're only a minute or two away from the actual trenches of the war. We get to see the like real hustle and bustle of trench life. Which looks truly miserable. There's minutes where we just go walking down these trenches, and there's dozens of men just huddled in the cold doing nothing. Like they have blankets on them, but the blankets themselves everything is wet looking. So it just seems so cold. There's guys smoking cigarettes, trying to like pick at scraps of food, and mostly just sit there, and everybody's being miserable. So it really gives you a picture of how bleak everything is. And everybody's just truly dirty. Nobody looks. You can't find one speck of non-dirty clothing on any of them. Everybody's covered in a thick layer of grime and grease. So as they're walking, they wonder what it is they're getting called up for. They know they might be meeting the general of their brigade, or I don't know if it's brigade, but a higher up guy. So they're like, what are we doing? They think maybe they might be getting food. The shorter guy, our friend Blake, hasn't eaten in a while, so he's hoping he just gets some food. But finally, after going through the trenches for a while, they make it to the bunker where all the higher up officers are, including a very high up general, who is the one who asked for them. So he pulls Blake aside. Oh, sorry. Oh, my alarm there. Apologies. So the general pulls Blake aside, as he's the one who has been called for. So Blake's there standing in the light while Schofield's all off in the dark. And he tells him the plan of what's going on. And he says, we've been fighting the Germans for a while now, and it looks like we've been winning. They've been retreating back, and we've been making all these gains, and so things have been looking good, but we've received intel that, what do you know, this was their plan the entire time. They've been trying to lure us into a trap. So there's a large group of men, about 1,600 men, who the general informs them are about to go on a very intense assault to try and finish off this, what looks to be a retreat, but is actually a trap. He says if these men do go through with this attack, that'll be 1,600 men who will basically die because they don't know what they're getting themselves into. It's going to be a bloodbath. And better yet, among those 1,600 men is none other than one of Blake's brothers. So not only is there a kind of duty stake in it for Blake, there's a personal stake as his brother's life is on the line, and it's his older brother. So the commander shows him first off, the commander says, you are going to be the one. You have very short amount of time, I believe less than a day, to get there to inform them of this coming attack, or this trap that they're walking into, kind of the whole Admiral Akbar thing. Blake apparently knows maps well, so they show him on the map where he needs to go, what he needs to do, what he should look out for, and the landmarks he will encounter, and says, if you don't do this, we're all going to die, so you better do this. Says you have the man you picked with you. That's all the only people who are going to be going. He accepts the mission right off the bat, no questions asked, because it's his brother and he doesn't want his brother to die. And basically, after the general's done talking, he just kind of rushes out. And Schofield, who has obviously heard everything and what he's about to get himself into, kind of hurries off behind him. Blake is just trying to dash out of there, get everything ready and get out of there so he can save his brother as fast as possible. But Schofield's a little bit more hesitant. He's saying, maybe we should wait till dark, slow down, buddy. Let's maybe think this thing through a little bit. But Blake is having nothing of it. He's getting all his stuff and heading straight through the trenches again. This time we're headed down the line. To the front line is where he's heading. So as they make their way through the line, they continue to bicker about it. Schofield says, let's wait. Blake says there's no time. And as they pass all these soldiers who are going the opposite direction, the soldiers are kind of like, what are you guys doing? You guys are going the wrong way. So you get this ominous sense that we're heading to a place that we do not want to be going. So we're slowly heading to the front lines, and there's less and less people until we get to the very front lines, which just looks like a true nightmare. As everybody's kind of, it seems like everybody's kind of a weird days, because I guess everybody can die at any second there. It's truly not the place you want to be. There's a head officer there who's out of it. It's probably like drunk or something, but he was joking around with them in a fun manner. But he warns Blake says, tells them the plan that they're going over and that they need to get across enemy lines, so that they're going to have to go through no man's land. So the guy warns them about the fact that they could die at any second out there. He says there hasn't been as much shooting because the Germans have been retreating, but there could still be stragglers. So if you go out, watch out. He offers them a flare gun so that if they get across, they can shoot it so that he'll know that they survived and they made it, or so that they can call for help if they get stuck out there and shot. But he tells them that they're probably not going to come save him. And then he makes a funny little joke about how if he does get shot, that they should throw back the flare gun so that the Germans don't get it. So it doesn't sound like we have too much faith in the boys right now, or at least this guy doesn't have too much faith in the boys. So Schofield's he's very, very nervous about it, but Blake's he's like, he knows what he has to do. He's ready to go over. So they brace themselves and prepare to go over, and the men who were at the front lines already didn't really believe that they're actually going to do it, but they charge over. And we find ourselves in a completely different world from the one we were in the nice, beautiful field landscape just 10 minutes ago. We are now in this terrifying post-apocalyptic landscape-ish. If you're playing Fallout 3 and you took the textures from the ground of that game and somehow made them into a real thing, that's what it would actually look like. It's like this gross mixture of sludge and shrapnel and rotting flesh, and we see a dead horse just out there rotting with a bunch of holes and craters and barbed wire and pieces of metal everywhere. So just a very scary place, and there's just a grim gray sky above it, I assume, from all the explosions that go wrong there, but I don't know. So they're sneaking low, and there's this constant anxiety because it seems like bullets could be flying out of nowhere at any moment. At one point, we see, we're ducking down because we see the planes flying over. We're not sure if it's good planes. Is it British or is it German planes? We don't know. But we make it to the barbed wire in the middle of the line. That's kind of dividing the two sides. There's a huge kind of wall of barbed wires, and I had no idea how they're going to get through that. But they find what looks to be a little hole where they can get through it. And Schofield finds a place where looks like he can hold it open, so he holds it open for Blake, and Blake makes it through all right. But when this part's bad. When he lets go of it, it gets caught on his hand, and it literally snares his hand. And he has to rip it out of his hand, and it's gross. So he has a big gash in his hand, which is already dirty. So you can just think of all the horrible germs just seeping in from the bat, or right off the bat. So from there they make a kind of a dash for one of the craters, and Schofield goes in first, and he falls into the pit. When you get our first real close up shot of what this mud or the landscape is made out of, and we see just parts of rotting corpses just coming out of the wall and making up the landscape, and he falls down right next to one person that is more put together. But a skeleton. I'll say this, I didn't think there was going to be skeletons. We saw one skeleton, a horse skeleton, and then two skeletons in this pit, and a couple more parts of skeletons later. So good skeleton reputation, this movie. But so he gets next to this corpse, and then as Blake falls in next to him, he gets startled and actually puts his huge bloody gash hand into the rotting stomach of the corpse next to him, and you can just see him in the despair and how gross and horrible and he's not happy, and I would not be either if I was in that situation. But nonetheless, they make their way out of the crater and into another crater, and there's a very cool shot where the camera pans over this big crater with water in it. It's big enough to be like a small pond with murky brown water, and we see them go across the edge of it, and finally they make their way out of what the true no man's land into what looks to be kind of a mine shaft area entrance in the trenches of the enemy. They jump into the enemy trenches, the no man's land part of it, and there's nobody there, and they find a tunnel mine shaft thing in the trenches. As they're going in, Schofield pulls out the only clean thing I've seen in the entire movie so far. Is he has a bandage and he puts it around his disgust. He does nothing to clean the wound really, but he puts a bandage around it, so that makes us feel a little bit better about it, but not really. And then they go in the tunnel. It's pretty scary. We're constantly worried that there's going to be people there, but so far no people. And they go into the tunnel a little bit, and we've come to this room, this huge room with a bunch of deserted bunks, like rusty and without mattresses. So it looks like they got out in a hurry and destroyed a bunch of stuff. Schofield sees a picture of presumably a German soldier's family and stares at it for a sec and moves on. We see rats scurrying about everywhere, eating what I don't even know what it was. It's bags of, looks like bloody little sacks hanging from the ceiling, and the rats are just chewing on it. It's disgusting. I make a joke about eating that, but you would never obviously want to eat that. So, but they do come to an area where they find some canned food, which I think is dog meat, and other gross things that you wouldn't want, but I think they take it anyways. And while they're there, our buddy Schofield, horror goes through his face as he pauses and freezes up and says that there's a tripwire on the ground, and we look and they have flashlights. I guess they had flashlights in 1917. That's news to me, but they flash their flashlights on the tripwire, and we breathe a sigh of relief because, like, oh good, they noticed it, so we're not going to die. That is until one of the rats who's dangling from the flesh bag falls down right next to it, and we're like, oh well, it didn't fall onto it, until it scurries right over it, and boom, a huge explosion goes. We black out for a sec, and we light back in, and it looks like he's conscious still, and he's dazed, but he tries to he hears screaming. That's kind of what gets him. He hears the screaming of Schofield. He's just yelling for help, and Blake gets up and he goes to the rubble where the explosion was, and there's just a huge pile of rubble, but everything's as he's going, the whole ceiling's like shaking, and there's huge rocks falling, and the beams are collapsing from the tunnel, so it looks like it's going down any second. But even still, Blake is not running out. He's right in there trying to get Schofield out. He's digging and digging and digging, pulling off huge things of rock, so I don't know how that would be horrible to have all of that on you. But he finally gets to Schofield, whose face is completely white and caked in dust and debris, and at that point he's already passed out. Blake screams at him and tries to wake him up, does everything he can, and finally Schofield comes to, and he can't see anything, and he doesn't know what's going on. He's super dazed. Blake pulls him up. He keeps screaming about how he can't see, but Blake just has him hold on to him. And everything's collapsing around them, but they finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they get out in the nick of time. Everything's collapsing. Truly terrifying and an anxiety-ridden moment. But he gets out. Schofield's mostly just trying to get all the dirt out of his eye and his mouth, while Blake's trying to get the bearings, see where they are, and they end up walking past a bunch of more abandoned shafts, it looks like, and more abandoned guns, like huge artillery guns that have been destroyed by the enemy or by the Germans themselves, who were trying to destroy them as they were going away, I guess, so the British couldn't use them. And then we see our plane friends flying over again. It seems like it's the British planes, so we're not too worried about it. So they're our boys. But then we also get our first sense of tension. Schofield, after he's finally got all the dust out of his eyes and his mouth, lashes out and says, like, why'd you have to choose me? Like, of anybody, like, I didn't know I was getting, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, why am I getting, of anybody, why me? Like, and, after you've had that much debris fall on you, I could definitely see where he's coming from right there. I don't, it sucks that he just had to get pulled into that out of nowhere, but, at the same time, Blake retorts, like, hey, I didn't know what we were getting into when they asked me to get you. I thought maybe we were getting food or something fun like that. And he even says, if you want to go back, go back. Like, I will go and do this myself. I'm not trying to get you into this. And Schofield's like, I can't go back, so whatever. And they're mad, but they're like, all right, we got to keep going. So they keep going. And Blake tries to kind of ease the tension by telling a funny story about how back in the day, a rat, not unlike the rat they saw in the tunnel, bit off one of his friend's ears, and they start laughing, and we're feeling a little bit better. So they keep walking, and finally they stumble upon a barn, or like kind of a settlement, not a settlement. There's a little house with a barn and a little stable thing. So they go there and they scope it out first to make sure that there's no enemies there, and they find nobody there, and they look for food, and they find a little bit of food, but I think not much. And they hear a moo from a cow, and they look and they go find a cow amongst some other dead cows, and Schofield goes over to the cow stable and finds some milk, which is fresh, or fresh enough to drink, I suppose. It's like in a milking bucket. So he tastes it first, and then he takes a nice swig of it, and you can just see he must have not had milk in a while, because you could just see how happy he is just drinking some milk. Which, I mean, I like milk, but he loved that milk. Pours some in his canteen to save for later. And then at that point, they see the planes once again, and this time, though, the planes are in a dogfight with another plane, a German plane, obviously. Schofield looks to Blake and says, "Who's winning?" And Blake says, "It looks like we're winning." And the British guys actually end up shooting down the British, or the British guys shoot down the German plane, and we see it crashing behind this hill that's really close to them, and then it pops up over the hill and it starts to come to the stable where they are, and eventually they start running, and it crashes right into the stable, but they ran away to safety, so they were unharmed. But right after it crashes, without hesitation, they run to where the plane is to try and save the pilot, and they're actually able to get him free, and they pull his body's burning, he's obviously messed up, and he's screaming, but they pull him from that. And Schofield says, "Yo, like, maybe we put this guy out of his misery right now," but Blake screams, "Just go get him some water, we're gonna save this guy." So Schofield runs off to go get the water, and he's filling water in his helmet, and then he turns and he hears a scream, but it's Blake's scream this time, and he looks back, and the German stabbed him already, and he's fighting him off him and pushes him off him, and no hesitation, Schofield, boom, 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 rounds right into that guy's nerve. This part got me. It was like when Shepard, Call of Duty, betrays you. It's like, how are you gonna save this? How are you gonna? You're gonna get saved, and you're gonna not even backstab, front stab the guys who legit just stayed. I don't know, not cool. So German's dead. Schofield runs to Blake. He's bleeding like crazy, so he tries to apply pressure, but Blake's just screaming in pain. It looks horrible. Schofield's trying to get him to move a little bit, but he can't even move, and he says, we're gonna make it, we're gonna keep going, but we think maybe, but we slowly begin to see that he's not going anywhere. So if anything, they just stop to lie down for a sec, but he's getting paler, and then he starts getting blue, and he starts getting scared, and he finally gets to the point where he asks Schofield if he's dying, and this part was rough. Schofield pauses for a sec, and I don't know what you would what's the right thing to even say in this kind of situation, and he really has to think about it, and then you could see it, he just says yes, and it hurts, and you can see the pain in both of their eyes, and it's sad. And he asks, Blake asks Schofield if Schofield will write to his mom and let him know that he was not afraid to die and that he wasn't scared of dying. And he kind of starts to accept what's happening, and it's sad. It's sad. And he's scared. And he asks Schofield to make sure he wants Schofield to assure him that he knows how to finish the mission and how to get there. And he tells him about his brother so he'll know what to look for, and says it's like him but a little bit taller. And as he asked him to recite the way, and Schofield, it pans up and he starts saying the way, and he totally remembers it completely. And as he's finishing the description of how to get there, we look down and it looks like Blake's not listening anymore, because he's gone. And Schofield takes a couple breaths. He takes the rings, the things that were unique to Blake, his rings. He takes the letter from the general. He finds a picture of Blake's family, and he puts it back and tucks it into his chest, to Blake's chest. And at that moment, we hear an English voice. We turn and we see a commander, a big commander guy, and he tells two of his men to help Schofield with the body, and they move it to the side and leave it. So we walk through the house to see that a whole company of guys has just arrived, and the commander says that Schofield can ride with them to deliver the message. So Schofield hops on the truck. It's sad that they didn't get there sooner to help him, but he hops on the truck and finds a bunch of jolly soldiers making some jokes, until they hit some mud in the road and the truck gets stopped. And Schofield just jumps out and is just panicking because he needs to go. And now he just saw Blake die, and he's just wants to get there, and he's panicking and screaming about how he's like, we need to get this truck going. And they're pushed a couple times and doesn't do anything. But they see just like Schofield is just, they see the terror in that man's eyes and his voice, and one of the guys says, all right guys, let's do it, like let's push this, and then they go boom and they actually push it, so that's cool. And then they hop back on, and then now that they've seen how gnarly Schofield is, they're like, oh, what's the deal, man, who are you? And they ask him about who he is, and he kind of tells them what he's been doing, and they figure out that he's lost the other guy who was supposed to be with him, and one of the dudes offers him like some alcohol, and eventually we get to a bridge where they would have been crossing, but the bridge is out, so Schofield hops out, tells the commander that he's going to go his own way since he needs to get there pronto, and the commander gives him a little bit of advice. He knows what Schofield's doing. He knows about his mission. And he says, watch out when you get to the guy you're giving that message to, because some men, they just want the fight. So we get this foreshadowing, or this, maybe we might run into troubles. Who knows? That's what I thought, at least. So he starts to make his way across the broken bridge as the guys pull off into the distance. And we see the debris or I guess the remnants or the ruins of a city is where he's crossing over to from the road. But as he's crossing, he's climbing across this bridge. We start to hear bullets hitting right around his head, and he freaks out, as one would, I suppose, if there was bullets around your head. And he jumps. He has to jump across the bridge, which is the crazy part. Didn't look fun. But as the bullets are flying at him, he gets onto the ridge, and he's able to get his gun and start putting down some fire at the window where he determines the bullets are coming from. And the fire stops eventually, and he makes his way to the building where the firing is coming from, and he's holding his breath as he's got his gun, and he's creeping slowly through the door and up the stairs. He's got his gun raised, and he finds the door to the room where the sniper is, and he presses up against the door, and he looks inside, and there's a German right on the ground with a pistol, and bop, they both shoot at the exact same time. And he gets that German right in the chest, and he gets shot right in the head, right in the helmet, falls back down the stairs, and blacks out. And we wake up to a drip of water on his eyes, and it's dripping on his eyes, and he wakes up, and it's nighttime now, and we look out of the window, and we see it's just total nighttime, total dark, but there is light coming from a bunch of flares flying over the rubble of the city, like shooting very slow motion, super bright shooting stars going right over, and it's casting different shadows as it goes through all the different cracks and windows of the city. So he leaves the building and he starts to walk through the rubble, only to find small fires, big fires, all across the city, broken buildings, half buildings. He hears voices, shouts in the distance, which can only be the remaining Germans who are still in the town, until he finally, through the haze of some fire, he sees a soldier who starts walking at him slowly, but starts walking faster, and then pulls out his gun and finally starts shooting at him and starts chasing at him. Schofield starts dashing off, but the guy's getting closer and closer. Schofield's still pretty dazed, so he's kind of having trouble getting started, until he gets to an area where he sees a small wooden plank thing blocking an entrance to a basement, and he kicks it a couple times, smashes through it, and in the nick of time slides into the basement and hears the footsteps go above him, just run right past him. Takes a couple breaths and looks back to get his bearings of where he is, and he sees that the room is actually lit. There's some lighting this room. And then he looks and he sees a bed that looks like it has stuff, signs of current living, like a bunch of knickknacks and trinkets all around this dirty little bed. And then he turns down to find who's presumably the owner of that bed, a little woman. And he is quick to assure her that he's not the enemy. It's probably pretty clear right off the bat because of his accent and his voice that she knows he's at least speaking English and is thus not a German soldier. So they try and get a few ideas across. He says he's a soldier. She's French. She's speaking French, and he knows a little bit of French. So they try and talk a little bit, but there's not much to get across. So he sits down for a sec, and there's a very nice, very just human moment where she just tends to the wounds on the back of his head. And then he notices that there's a baby in the room. He's crying a little bit, and she goes over to grab the baby and picks it up and there you go. There's a baby in this bombed out city. Who knows how? But it's not her baby. She just found it in the rubble, and she's been watching for the past couple days. And immediately, Schofield dumps out all the food he's got and says, "Yo, take this food. Like, that's for your baby to eat." And she says, "Thank you, thank you, but the baby can't eat this food. It's a baby. It needs milk." And then, if you'll remember, Schofield's eyes, they light up, and he pulls out his canteen immediately, and he says milk in French, and he presses it to the woman and shows it to her, and she can't even believe it. I loved this. It's just these two strangers who just, without question, looking out for each other. And she can't believe it. She loves it. She thanks him. She asks him, "Yo, like, do you have? Do you have kids?" And he doesn't answer. He's just trying to focus on helping her out, and asks a different question about where they are. And he figures out where they are, and is at that time that a clock chimes, and he realizes, oh wow, like, I've lost a lot of time being asleep in that sniper's hour. And he runs off, wishes her the best, says goodbye. And as he runs off, he runs right into another guy, a German guy, and he grabs him and covers his mouth and says, don't scream. And he puts his mouth off, and obviously the guy screams. So Schofield starts strangling him and killing him, and a partner of the guy comes into the room, but he's drunk and he's singing, and only too late does he realize his friend is dying in the corner, but starts shooting at Schofield after he's killed his buddy. So Schofield runs out of the building and into more groups who try to corner him, and he makes this mad dash out of the town, and we see the town fading away, and he's getting shot at as he goes onto this bridge and this ledge, and he jumps off, and before you know it, he's plunged into a river below. He's drifting for a while through the rapids, into some rocks, finally falls down a waterfall, and at the bottom washes up to this huge tree that's damming up the entire place, with a bunch of debris and a few dozen bloated and rotting corpses. So more corpses, more fun. Schofield's been near a lot of corpses. So he climbs over all these decomposing, like, blue, just disgusting bodies as he makes his way to the shore. And this is where he gets onto the shore and hunches over, and everything finally hits him, and it releases, and he just cries for a second. And I don't know how you didn't cry already, but he had been numb and holding everything back, and he lets it all out. And as he's crying, he hears something, and he looks up and he follows it, and we begin to realize it's something. It sounds like English, so he keeps following, and he realizes it's singing, like a beautiful song is being sung. I don't know how to. It's kind of like what you think of if, like, in like a Lord of the Rings book, where if you heard elves singing in the forest, it's like that kind of vibe. So he slowly stumbles upon a huge group of troops just sitting silent in the forest, all sitting down on the ground with their stuff at their sides, just watching this soldier sing in the middle of the forest. And he's quiet. He sits down very quietly amongst them and listens to the song until it's finished, and just sits there as everybody gets up, and a few come over and ask, like, "Hey, buddy." And he looks wrecked by this point. He doesn't have his gun or anything, and they say, "What's up, dude? Like, where are you from? What are you doing?" And he's having trouble talking, but he mentions the company that he's looking for, and they're like, "Hey, buddy, that's us, hey, but," and he's like, "What?" And he perks up immediately, and he says, "All right, well, what's the deal with the attack? Where is everybody? When's it happening? Where is it?" And the guys say, "Oh, dude, that's happening right now. You better get moving. Get into the trenches." So they point him down to the trenches, and he bursts out of the forest, and we see this huge line of troops going into this huge long trenches, and he has to just the trenches are about 1 1/4 people wide, and he's pushing past a bunch of people, screaming and yelling like, I need to get through. And it sounds like not a place you'd want to be, but we see him running through the trenches, and he finally gets to where the attack is about to be starting, and finds an officer who says like, yo, we're about to start this. We're like I'm just waiting for the thing so that we can go over, and then we're going over, and we can see all the guys are right near the top of the trenches, ready with their guns ready. They're about to go over. So he's rushing past them. So he keeps running. The guy directs him, at least in the direction of the head guy he's supposed to get the message to, but we can see the chaos is already ensuing. So he gets directed up again the line, and we see it's getting crazier and crazier the further he goes up the line, and mortar starts, or like artillery strikes start landing, and men are like counting down, and he gets to the next officer who he asks for a question, and it's just this old man officer just sobbing uncontrollably because of how truly terrifying everything around him is. And he finds another guy and says, where do I go? And he points him down the line again. He gets to an officer. So the first wave has started. He gets to the officer who says, you're close, but like you're not going to get, he realizes he's not going to get there in time if he just keeps going through the trenches, and he realizes like, I'm going to have to go up. And so as this part of the trenches is about to go over, he bolts out over the trenches before everybody's going, and then everybody starts going up after him. So he's going perpendicular to the tide of the battle, and there's just strikes, bombs going off everywhere, explosions. He's running through explosions. He's running into guys constantly. He trips hard a couple times, but finally he makes it back into the trenches. He finally finds the bunker. He runs to it, but there's 2 guys standing guard, and they're like, bro, what do you think you're doing going in here looking like that? You get out of here. But he like goes Hulk past them. He says, he gets into the room where the commander and says, hey, everybody, listen to me. This attack is being called off. And this is where we finally get our Benedict Doctor Strange cameo. And that's the commander, and he says, what do you mean calling off? We're not calling off this attack. We've pushed these guys all the way in. This is this is it. We've worked all of this so we can get to this point. We're not going to stop right now. What are you thinking? And Schofield's like, no, you can't do that. I have officers from the head general. You are told to stop this. I did everything to get here. Stop it. Benedict is like, the first wave has already gone over. I'm not going to stop this attack. No. And then it looks like the commander is right. I guess we are going to run into this problem of having this guy who's going to fight the battle, even though he has direct orders not to. And Schofield's getting escorted out of the room, and that's when he says, look, this is a trap. The Germans have planned this. They wanted you to have all of these victories you've had up until now. They wanted you to think that this is all a trap. They planned this. And Benedict Cumberbatch is like, you could tell he really wants to keep going, but he gives in and says, let me see that letter. And he reads it and says, all right, call off the attack. And he's just bummed. He's mostly just angry. He's angry that he feels like he's put in all of this work and he's had all these great victories and all for nothing, and they were so close and it's all taken away, and he gets mad at Schofield, but he says, all right, get out of my face, kid. As he's leaving the bunker, one of his Benedict's right-hand mans gives Schofield the praise he really deserved after doing everything he got yelled at, but this guy's nice and he says, hey kid, you did good, like, thank you. And so he sends him on his way to go get healed up, sends him to the infirmary wing, whatever, the medical place. But that's not what Schofield's interested. He's interested in finding the brother, that's who he's trying to save. We've been trying to save this whole time. And he gets word that the brother went with the first wave, so that is not good. So he definitely had the chance to have gotten her. And so we get to the infirmary wing, which is another scene of just a lot of pain, a lot of painful things happening. There's a lot of guys who are just dying, limbs gone, bleeding out, in shock. So he's he's screaming to everybody if anybody knows a Blake. Do you know Blake? Do you know Blake? Trying to find Blake, but nobody has time to deal with this Blake nonsense. So he just keeps going, and he's looking around everywhere, and he gets to the end of the infirmary, and he hasn't found him until he sees a guy who's directing people towards the infirmary, and he looks at him, and it's like, oh, maybe Blake? And he's like, yes. And he's like, oh. And so he kind of introduces himself. I was the one who call off this attack. I came with your brother. And Blake's like, oh, great. Where's little boy? Where's my little boy? And that's where Schofield's like, he's not here. He didn't make it. And then you just see everything in Blake's face, older Blake's face, just change. And there's a silence for a little bit as he's processing it for a second. Schofield asks if he can write. He asked permission to the older brother as well, if, like he said, he can write to the mother. And older Blake tries to remain truly as stoic as possible, but you can hear him shaking and like trying not to cry as he says yes, of course. And Schofield then takes the rings and Blake's possessions out of his pocket, and you could see once older Blake is handed that, you realize it hits him on another level, because those are like the real signs that those were parts of Blake that were him. Those are proof. That's proof, pieces of him that shows if they're not with him, he's gone, and it's real. Like what Schofield's saying is the truth, and you could see the pain in his eyes there. But what really hits him, and this one really hit me too, this one got me, but is he's saying, like, your brother was a great man, he was a brave soldier, and while he's saying that, he says he's a brave soldier, and he told funny stories. Those were the two things he said, and it was when he said the funny stories part that the older Blake just winces, and it's that moment. It's moments like this in the movies where you try and put yourself in the place of that character, and that's what hearing that means. And when you hear him, he grew up with that guy. Like, he heard the funny stories growing up, so he knows exactly what Schofield's talking about, and then it's like hearing that and then thinking that you'll never hear one of those stories again. And it's a sad thing to think about, and it's sad that he has to go through the real man Blake had to go through that. But through the pain, he tells Schofield to go get help for his wounds, and he stumbles off to presumably process what happened or just break down completely. And Schofield does this. He stumbles off, but not to the infirmary, but right down in a tree in a field, much like the one we started off at. And in our last shot, he pulls out a picture, and we realize that when that woman in the city asked if he had a family, his ignoring the question wasn't a no. It was just, it's probably that he didn't want to talk about the family that he did have, as he pulls out a picture of his family, his wife and his little girl. And well, it's nice to know that at least he saved a lot of guys, and he got to go back to his family, and it's nice. And so that was the end of the movie. A very truly beautiful movie. So if you want to hear so this was just a straight up plot summary. If you'd like to hear my review on the movie, which is definitely a good review, I'm not saying my reviewing it is good. I'm saying is my review is a positive review of the movie, because obviously this movie is a great movie. But yeah, if you'd like to check that out, that'll be up very soon. So check that out. And soon I will be seeing Just Mercy next, and we'll have a Plotcast episode 2 up for that. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.